بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. The first hadith which we are going to look at is a hadith which can be found in the Sahih of Imam Bukhari rahmatullah alayh. And this hadith is narrated by Ibn Abbas radhiyallahu anhu. Anna imra'ata Thabit bin Qais atat an-Nabiyya sallallahu alayhi wasallam. That once the wife of Hazrat Thabit bin Qais radhiyallahu ta'ala anhu came to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Now, even though it's not mentioned in this particular hadith, but it's mentioned in a hadith of Sunan ibn Majah, that Thabit bin Qais radiyallahu ta'ala anhu's wife's name was Jamila. So Jamila came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she says, Ya Rasulullah, O Prophet of Allah, Thabit bin Qais radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he's a very, very good person. He's got good akhlaq, he's got good manners. Wala deenin, his deen and piety and taqwa is very, very good. However, walakinni akrahul kufra fil Islam. However, I dislike to be ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, what Thabit bin Qais radiallahu ta'ala anhu's wife was trying to imply, she's trying to say that Thabit bin Qais radiallahu ta'ala anhu, as a husband, as a person, in terms of manners, in terms of akhlaq, in terms of deen, taqwa, piety, he's mashallah very, very good. However, me and Thabit, we don't just get along. It's like we say in Urdu, like banti nahi hai. You know, the husband and wife, they're not getting along. Nothing wrong with in terms of manners and akhlaq and good. In terms of piety and taqwa, Thabit bin Qais anhu is a very, very good person. In terms of beauty, he's very, very good. But what happens, me and him, we don't see eye to eye. We don't really get along together. Sometimes it happens in certain marriages where there's nothing wrong with the husband, there's nothing wrong with the wife. The wife, mashallah, is very good. The husband is very, very good. But the husband and wife, they're not on the same wavelength. You know, it could be so like the husband's from another class, or he may be a bit more modern thinking and the wife may be a bit more backward thinking, and because of that reason they don't get along with each other. So this is what Hazrat Thabit bin Qais radiallahu ta'ala anha's wife was saying to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he's a very good person, but me and him, we don't really get along with each other, and because of this reason I don't want to be ungrateful to Allah. Now, what does she mean by she doesn't want to be ungrateful to Allah? She's trying to say that marriage is a blessing from Allah. It's a ni'mat from Allah. So by me staying with Thabit bin Qais radhiyallahu anhu and not giving my true love to Thabit bin Qais radhiyallahu anhu, I am now being ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because there are many, many women who don't have husbands, many, many men who don't have wives. So I've actually got a husband. And obviously when you have a husband, when you have a wife, you should be grateful to Allah. But now Jamila is saying that, look, because I don't like this person, I'm now stuck in a marriage which I don't really want to be with this person, and then I can't really fulfill his rights and his huquq, and in terms of what I'm doing is I'm actually being ungrateful to Allah. Now what did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then said, Aturidina alayhi hadiqatahu. That do you want to return Thabit, or return back to Thabit bin Qais radiallahu ta'ala anhu the garden which he gave you as a mahar and as a dowry. Now when Thabit radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when he got married to Jamila, as I mentioned before, that you need to give a mahar, you need to give a dowry. And the dowry which he gave to her was a garden, a big massive beautiful garden, many, many date trees. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying to Jamila that, okay, basically you want a khula, you want a cancellation of the marriage. Now I will only agree to it, I'll only put it forward to Thabit if you agree to hand over the mahar or the dowry which he gave you, i.e. the garden, back to him, and then we'll see whether he wants to go ahead with you or not. So qalat na'am. So Hazrat Thabit radiallahu ta'ala anhu, whose wife Jamila replied by saying, na'am, yes, I agree to hand over my garden back to him. Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then said to Thabit, Iqbalil hadika, accept the garden which your wife is giving back to you, wa talliqha tatliqatan, and give her one talaq and give her one divorce. Now the hadith which I've just mentioned or recited to you talks about the ruling of khula in Islam. Now, as I mentioned in last week's lesson, that talaq is something which is given by the husband. But you may have a situation where the husband is kind of exploiting this particular right for his benefit and against his wife. Now what I mean by that, you could have a scenario where the husband, he doesn't like his wife. So in Islam, it's flexible for the man. He could then get married to someone else. He could then move to another country. He could then move to another town or a city, get married again, and then settle down with his second wife or with his new wife. Now his first wife here, say in Birmingham, she wants to actually move on with her life as well. The first husband is not giving her talaq or divorce. So because of that reason, she can't move on with her life. She can't then get married to someone else. Why? Because in Islam, it's not permissible for a woman to have two husbands at any one time. For the man, it's flexible. If he doesn't like his wife, he doesn't even have to give her talaq. He could then get married to someone else and start living with her. So what sometimes happens is that people, they use this right of talaq and divorce, the husbands in particular, for their benefit, to go against their wives. And they say to their wife, oh, do you know what, you don't like me, I don't like you, but I'm never ever going to give you a talaq and a divorce. Then what happened? The husband then settles with his own family, with his own wife, with his own life, and then you've got the sister or the wife here stuck somewhere in no man's land. She doesn't know whether she wants to move along with her life or she's kind of stuck in the first marriage. So what normally happens in that situation, because obviously the right of talaq is for the husband, but in this situation what could happen is that the wife, she could tempt the husband by saying to the husband that, you know, the items or the money which you gave me as mahar and as dowry, I'll give that back to you and you give me a talaq and you give me a divorce. So that's one way for the wife to actually ask for a divorce, that she could say to the husband that I'll give you my dowry and my mahar back and you give me a talaq and you give me a divorce. Now if the wife initiates the divorce and the talaq and thereafterwards the husband accepts it, then we call that in Islam a khula. A khula. Khula meaning like a cancellation of the marriage. But remember, this khula has to be from both parties. The husband has to consent and the wife will also has to consent to as well. We look at it later, the situations where if a wife was to initiate a divorce without the husband acknowledging the divorce or without the husband agreeing to a divorce, then Islamically speaking, that is not a divorce, that is not a talaq. So what I'm trying to say, for a khula, it has to be consent from both parties. The wife initiating the divorce and the talaq, or asking for a divorce and a khula, and then the husband agreeing and accepting it, then that is known in Islam as a khula and as a cancellation of the marriage. So that is one situation. Then you've got another situation where you've got a husband who's not fulfilling his wife's rights at all, who's actually oppressing his wife. Like the scenario I gave here, where the husband has moved to another town, to another city, to another country, and then the wife is alone by herself in a rented apartment in Birmingham. The husband's not providing for her, the husband is not giving her the rent, the wife has to do everything by herself. So in these situations, the wife, what happens is that she then goes to the husband, asks for a separation, but the husband doesn't agree to a separation. Now, what can the wife do in this situation? Now, in this situation here, the wife can take her case to something what we call an Islamic Sharia Council. And in this Islamic Sharia Council, if they will assess the situation, and if they think that the husband is being a bit oppressive here to his wife, they could actually cancel the marriage even though the husband may not agree to it. But remember, there's like processes in place in terms of if the wife was to go to an Islamic Sharia Council, the Islamic Sharia Council firstly will have to try their best to contact the husband. If the husband gets back to them and he wants to have a meeting with them, then that's different. And then they could try to reconciliate or come to a middle path. However, if the Islamic Sharia Council have tried contacting the husband, but the husband's not picking up his phone, he's not replying to the message, then what the Islamic Sharia Council can do is that they can cancel the marriage. So they can say that, okay, 12th of March 2012, the marriage has been cancelled. So afterwards, when the wife then fulfills her iddah, her waiting period of 3 menstruation cycles, then she would be allowed to marry someone else. And the judgment passed by that Islamic Sharia Council would be considered valid and would be considered accepted. So what I'm trying to say is that there's 2 things here. One is for a khula. For a khula, you need the consent from the husband and wife. But for a fasq nikah, for a cancellation of the marriage through Islamic Sharia Council, it can be initiated by the wife. And if the Sharia Council have tried their best to contact the husband, but the husband is not answering their messages or is not replying to their calls, then the Islamic Sharia Council have a right to actually cancel the marriage. Now remember, I want to elaborate on this because unfortunately you get what we call imposters. Imposters meaning and this is something which we should not be upset about, or we should not be taken aback, because this is one of the signs of day judgment, that a time will come there will be a lot of kadhabs, a lot of imposters. People will claim to be scholars, but in reality they're not scholars. People will claim to be great sheikhs and imams, but in reality they're not great sheikhs and imams. And this will continue to happen until Dajjal. Dajjal is the greatest of all imposters, because he will claim to be God. He will claim to be a Nabi. He will claim to be firstly Imam Mahdi. Then he will claim to be a prophet. Then he will claim to be God himself. So an imposter or a kadhab is someone who claims to be something which they really not. Now exactly here as well, unfortunately, we have many people who just made a Sharia council by themselves. And some of these Sharia council, unfortunately, which you have, there's not a single imam or a alim or a mufti sitting on them. It's just like a few doctors got together and they said, let's make a Sharia council. So it's just doctors sitting on the Sharia council, or lawyers or barristers sitting on the Sharia council. Now what happens, these Sharia council, not all of them, but some of them, they are very women friendly. What I mean by that is a sister will write in or will come and say, oh, my husband, he's very bad to me. So I say, okay, the husband's very bad. And then straight away they'll cancel the marriage without actually listening to the husband's side of the argument, that is the husband like this. They will just there and there cancel the marriage. And that is totally wrong. And if somebody does a cancellation of the marriage through that particular way, without that Sharia council trying to contact the husband, then such a cancellation of the marriage would not be deemed valid in the Sharia. And if the sister then afterwards then gets married to someone else, then she would be living in sin. Because remember, I'll explain this difference. One is fatwa and one is qada or faisla. Now remember, for fatwa, you don't need the other person in front of you. Because fatwa, first and foremost, is not binding. It's not binding on anyone. And you don't need that person who you're talking about to be in front of you. So what I mean is, just say for example, a brother was to come to me now and he was asking, oh, Mufti Sahib, can you give me some advice or a fatwa regarding this situation which I'm in at home with my wife? So I probably will give him some advice that I think this is what you should do and this is what the Quran and the Sharia says. Now that information which I've given to that brother, it's not binding. Meaning he could then afterwards go outside, meet another mufti and ask him for his consultation or his advice regarding this issue, and he could act upon his fatwa, he could act upon the fatwa given here. However, when it comes to a faisla, you need both parties in front of you. When it comes to a faisla, because a faisla or a judgment or a qada, that is binding on you and that is binding on the people around you. So just say, for example, if a wife is coming to you and she's saying that, oh, my husband's like this, can you cancel the marriage? You need to say to her, well, I can't just do that, I need to listen to your husband. I need to listen to your husband, what is he saying? Is it actually true that the husband is beating you up? Let me ask the husband and see what he says. Now, obviously, if the husband comes and says, well, I didn't actually do this, I didn't even touch her, this is all a lie, then you can't just cancel the marriage. And obviously, if the Sharia Council are trying over a number of months or even years, trying their best to contact the husband, but the husband is not willing to listen, then in that situation, they can cancel the marriage. But what I'm trying to say is that the Sharia Council, they have to listen to arguments from both sides. They can't just listen to the wife's side and say, oh, the husband's a zalim, he beats me up, he does this to me, and then just listening to the wife's side of the story, just cancel the marriage. That is not allowed, and if they do it, then such a cancellation would not be valid. Because just recently, many brothers have actually phoned me. I'm not going to mention which Sharia Council he is, but they phoned me and said, this Sharia Council here, if you go to them, if a sister was to go to them and was to give them money, and was to say, okay, I'll give you £100, can you cancel my marriage for me? The Sharia Council would just cancel the marriage for that particular sister. So what they're doing is they're actually falling, that sister is actually buying them out. She's actually saying, okay, I'll give you £100, I'll give you £200, I'll give you £1,000, just cancel my marriage. So what they do is just like cancel the marriage and they take £1,000. Very easy to cancel the marriage. You just have to write in a paper, the marriage is cancelled, and you get £1,000. But such a cancellation would not be considered valid or deemed correct in the eyes of the Sharia. You need to listen to the other side of the story. Okay? So these are a couple of points to remember regarding cancellation of the marriage. Now this then takes me on to another point here regarding wife initiating a divorce, but this time the wife initiating a divorce not through an Islamic Sharia Council but through the UK courts. So just say, for example, the husband and wife, they got married according to the law of this country. They went to the civil office, registrar office, they got the nikah and marriage done. So according to the law of the country, you're now a husband and wife. Now, as you know, according to the law of this country, it's not a husband's exclusive right to give divorce. The wife could also file for a divorce as well. So just say, for example, there's a Muslim couple and the wife is filing for a divorce. Now obviously Islamic, she's not allowed to do it, but according to the law of this country, she's allowed. So she's filing for a divorce. Now what would happen in that situation? Now the ruling is that if the wife has filed for a divorce and then the letter then comes to the husband, now if the husband reads the letter or he just looks at the letter and he just like throws it away or he doesn't even open the letter, then 6 weeks later, because I think the way the process works is 6 weeks afterwards, there's an absolute decree absolute. So when the courts give a decree absolute, that according to the law of the Sharia would not be considered to be a valid divorce or a talaq. Why? Because the husband hasn't consented to it. He received the letter, he read the letter, but he just threw it away, or he didn't even bother opening the letter. So in that situation, if the courts then give a divorce, then that would not be considered to be a valid divorce. However, if the wife initiated the divorce, the letter, it came to the husband read it, he looked at it, and then he signed it. He signed it. Now, if the husband signed it, then that would be considered to be now a valid divorce. Because now when you looked at it and you signed it, and we mentioned last week's lesson, like through signing or writing the divorce is also valid and accepted as well. So what I'm trying to say is that if the wife initiated a divorce, but the husband did not respond to the divorce, he just threw the letters away or he didn't even open the letter, that would not be considered to be a valid divorce, However, if the wife initiated the divorce and thereafter the husband wrote it, or he accepted it, or he signed it, then in that situation it will be considered a valid divorce. Which then takes me on to another point, that a divorce which is given by the UK courts, Islamically speaking, what kind of divorce is it called? Because in last week's lesson I mentioned there are two types of divorce. One is called irrevocable divorce, talaq raj'i, and then there's a second category known as a irrevocable divorce is known as talaq ba'in, and revocable divorce is known as talaq raj'i. So what kind of divorce would occur when a divorce has been given by the UK courts? Now the answer to this particular question depends on the wording of the letter which the husband received. If the wordings were such as separation or annulment or cancellation, these kind of words were used, and then the husband signed it at the bottom, then in that situation, one talaq ba'in, i.e. one irrevocable divorce will occur. Because I mentioned in last week's lesson that when you use words like separation or cancellation, then one talaq ba'in occurs. Yeah? So there will be one irrevocable divorce in terms of the nikah will break there and there. And if they want to get back together again, they will have to redo the nikah and redo the marriage. However, if the words on the letter was something like, by now you have been divorced from your wife, daughter of such and such. So if the word divorce was written, then in that situation it will be one talaq raj'i, one revocable divorce, where, like for example, the nikah will not break straight away Islamically, and if you want to take it back, then you can revoke that divorce within the iddah period and within the waiting period. So that is a nutshell of how the talaq situation will occur, if it's a hula, if it's a cancellation of the marriage via a Sharia council, or if it's talaq through the UK courts. The next hadith which we're going to look at is a hadith which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, narrated by Abdullah bin Umar anhu, that once he gave his wife talaq, وَهِيَ حَائِضٌ, while she was in the state of period or menstruation. So basically Abdullah bin Umar anhu's wife was on a haze, and he gave her one talaq and one divorce. Thereafter the hadith goes on to say, فَذَكَرَ عُمَرُ لِرَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم, that Hazrat Umar anhu then mentioned this to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that my son Ibn Umar anhu has given his wife talaq in her periods. Now the hadith goes on to say, فَتَغَيَّزَ فِيهِ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very, very angry. His face changed, i.e. he was very, very angry that why did Abdullah bin Umar anhu give his wife talaq and divorce during her periods. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very angry, and he said to Hazrat Umar anhu to go and tell Ibn Umar لِيُرَاجِعْهَا, to revoke this divorce, ثُمَّ يُمْسِكْهَا حَتَّى تَطْهُرَ ثُمَّ تَحِيضَ فَتَطْهُرَ, and then he should wait until she becomes pure and pak. Thereafterwards, she then goes through another menstruation cycle. She thereafterwards becomes pak and pure, and thereafterwards, if he wants أَيُّطَلِّقَهَا فَلْيُطَلِّقْهَا طَاهِرًا قَبْلَ أَن يَمَسَّهَا, he should then give her a talaq or a divorce before he has intercourse with her. Okay, now very quickly, this particular hadith which I mentioned talks about giving talaq to a woman in her menstruation cycle. Now, according to the majority of the imams, so the majority of the scholars have said that if a husband gave his wife talaq during her periods, during her haze, during her menstruation cycle, the talaq would be done. The talaq would be valid, even though what he did was haram, or what he did was impermissible, or what he did was disliked. Now remember, in Islam, you're not allowed to give 3 talaqs in one go. You're not allowed to say to your wife, talaq, talaq, talaq. You're not allowed to say that. It's actually considered to be talaq bid'ah, a very reprehensible and an impermissible way of giving talaq to your wife. Similarly, if your wife is in a period, you're not supposed to give her talaq, you're not supposed to give her divorce. Now why? You may be thinking, what's the big deal here? The reason why is that when a woman is in a period, she's actually, when you look at it, she's ill. It's actually like an illness. It's like a weakness. So she's got other things on her mind, because obviously women who suffer from periods, they tend to be a bit moody during that period. They tend to have mood swings. The reason why is because it's something which is painful, like blood coming out of their body is something which is painful. Even if we were to cut our, say, arm or hand and some blood comes out, we feel that kind of pain. So similarly, women who have periods, they also have some pain as well when the blood is coming out of the uterus. So now if a person, when a wife is going through a difficulty, i.e. her period, so now if a husband was to give her a divorce, then you're adding another problem over a problem which she's already in. You're adding another difficulty, a musibah, over a musibah which she is in. So therefore the scholars have said that you should not give divorce or talaq to a wife who is in her period. However, if you do give it, then that talaq would be considered valid. It's going to be done. The same way, you shouldn't give 3 talaqs in one go. However, if a husband did give his wife 3 talaqs in one go, then the 3 talaqs would be valid. Now some may argue and say, well, Mufti Sahib, if 3 talaqs in one go is haram, or if, say, for example, giving talaq to your wife who's in a period is haram, then how can something which is haram be considered valid in the Sharia? Now there's many examples of that in the Sharia where we see many things which are haram. However, if somebody does it, the consequences come into effect. What I mean by that, say for example, shooting someone, that's haram. However, if somebody pulls the trigger and he shoots that person would die. The consequences would come into effect. For example, if somebody's mobile phone is outside, so now for me to pick it up and break it, that is haram. But if I did pick it up and then break it, then what I've done is haram, but the mobile phone will break. Exactly the same way regarding giving talaq in the state of periods or menstruation, or to give 3 talaqs in one go. What the husband did was haram. There's no denying that. But when he gave it, the consequences will happen, i.e. it will come into effect. So exactly here as well, what Ibn Umar anhu did to his wife, he gave his wife talaq. So what did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say? He said that, look, the talaq will occur, will happen, but out of compassion, out of rahmah, out of mercy, what you should do is you should actually revoke the talaq. Take the talaq back, and thereafterwards, after she becomes clean, after she becomes pure from her menstruation cycle, then you got a choice of, if you want, you could give her another talaq, or if you want, you can then leave it as it is until you then decide whether you want to keep her or whether you want to divorce her. So that is the second hadith. And very quickly, the third hadith which we're going to look at is a hadith I mentioned in passing in last week's lesson, a hadith which can be found in Sunan Abu Dawud, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "Abghadul halali ilallahi at-talaq." That out of all the halal and the lawful things, the most disliked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving talaq to your wife. I mentioned the wisdom in last week's lesson that the Sharia actually tells us that, look, if you are going through difficulties, then try counseling, try reconciliating. Try this, try that, try even a separation period where you could just say to your wife, just go to your parents' house for a week or so, and then, or a couple of months or so, and then we'll take you afterwards. So you should try other kind of means. And if, say, for example, after trying and exerting all your efforts in making the marriage work, you can't make the marriage work, then the last thing which you are allowed to do is to give the talaq to your wife. But even then, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Sharia dislikes that. And Allah, in this particular hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has used the words that out of all the halal and the lawful things, the most disliked is giving talaq to your wife. We leave it there for this week. May Allah give us the tawfiq to what we said. Wa akhiru da'wan alhamdulillah.